Welcome to Monfre Tell the Truth, where we shine a bright light into the mirth, myth, and mysteries of marketing and sales, and we help lead you to the sweet, sweet promised land of amazing KPIs, because who doesn't want that, right? I'm Pete Monfre, and this is my marketing truther co-host, Jason Myers. You know, I don't always know what Jason's talking about, but I know he's telling the truth. How are you doing, man? It's good to see you.
Doing well today.
Awesome. Well, I'm not. I'm upset.
Why is that?
I got something stuck in my craw. I got to get out. That's what we say in Texas, you know, like, I got it stuck in my craw.
Does it have something to do with KPIs?
It does, actually, because we're always yapping about them. Always yapping about the KPIs, but here's the thing. Are we measuring, not you and me, our companies or the marketing industry, are we measuring what's easy to measure, or are we measuring what matters?
Well, I want to measure what's easy.
Oh, well, the former. No, the latter. No, I don't know.
Whatever makes me look good, that's
I
what I
think
want to
it
measure.
is. I think you're right, actually. I think it's a problem. And let's, how do we elucidate? Do you like that? See, I pulled that word right out like that. How
That's
do we
good.
elucidate? Well, let me try this, and if at the risk of boring everyone, a little bit of history, because who doesn't love that? Think about this for a minute. Back in the old days, there were three channels to consumers, right? There were three channels. These, you know, when the TVs were in every house, right? When it got big, and it was the Ed Sullivan Show, and you could just run a commercial with Fred Flintstone, you know, smoking a Laramie, and then, you know, within a few weeks, everyone's got cancer, you know, across the country. And it was really actually as simple as that. I mean, that was advertising. Marketing was not quite born yet, right? It was just you would run these ads, and of course, radio predated that. Now, fast forward to today, we've got a fragmentation that nobody could have ever imagined. And along the way, see, we were in business when this was all born. The whole digital universe was born. We were doing business because look at how old I am, right? I remember it when Al Gore, you know, he invented it. And it was interesting, the shift on metrics, because we were working with Fortune 100, 500 companies at that time. So we were all about metrics, but it shifted to things like clicks, to things like, I'm trying to think of some of the dumber ones here. I think I've got them written down here. Like vanity metrics, I would call them, right? Sort of like they sound good and they look good, but they don't mean a lot. The number of followers, social followers, the number of impressions, net new names in the database, right?
Well, and those were all branding metrics, right?
Right. I mean, they're
Like,
they're getting towards it.
well, it was the only thing that we had to measure it.
But it became very easy to measure, especially and then and this was the early days. This is probably the early '90s, the earliest days of their internet. And just because of the nature of those systems, those a lot of those things were easy to measure, right?
Well, and
Now it's become an obsession.
that's what we measured. All advertising was on impressions, right?
Impressions, right?
Like whether it was TV or magazines, or everything was about number of impressions. And in fact, magazines used to approach us for advertising, talking about number of impressions and pass through readership and all that kind of stuff. So it was
Yeah.
all
So
about eyeballs.
right. Um, you know, I think analytics has promoted the idea where you can literally measure so many things that you can't. Does that make any sense? You can, but you can't really. You know, I think when it comes in, and you know, different parts of the company have different types of metrics. We're talking primarily sales and marketing metrics. You know, the ones that count at the end of the day are the profitability, quality over quantity. That's another thing, is we're so focused on quantity, but people aren't thinking about quality.
Well, one thing I would add here is that now this is where the genesis of sales and marketing alignment got stuck, because back then those were the metrics uh, that you were measured against for marketing.
Right.
So marketing's job was to create brand awareness. And so we had metrics that really came from TV and radio and print
Mass media.
that we adopted for the web because we didn't have any other types of ways to do it. The whole idea, back then, a salesperson could leverage off that branding enough to go and fill their calendar full of appointments uh, just by knocking on doors, and hopefully, you know, they've heard of us when they go to talk to them.
Right. Well, you know that famous McGraw-Hill ad with the old guy in the chair. I'll put it up on the screen. It's a famous ad that really has this curmudgeon-y looking dude that says, "Hey, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're selling. I don't know nothing about you. Blah 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 and on. So what do you want to sell me?" It's like that's they said at the time that was the job of advertising, and that was from the 50s. I think it was an Ogilvy ad. But you got me thinking about, they did just use the same paradigm and put it online, but they added some metrics that then became the focus. Like for example, in your example, close rate would be one that I would be looking at. It's almost like we're measuring activity instead of the results.
Right. Well,
Something like that.
sales had their own metrics. They still do. Marketing had their metrics. Their metrics were more focused around impressions and and then later driving traffic to the website, and even later still was conversions and lead generation and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
MQLs, SQLs.
So yeah. So what are so I think I don't know if that if there's a lot more to go into there, but what are some of the piss poor measurements that we do? I think just even like open rates, for example, in email marketing. I think one of the things that people do, and this is where I think many of us go wrong, is we start to think that the numbers themselves, the specific numbers, are accurate, or like in analytics, when you really should be looking at the trend, right? Where those numbers, they're not exact, but people get very hung up on them as being exact. And again, it's
What's
like it's the simple metrics that make the business successful, and there's maybe 10 of them that you should really be paying attention to. A lot of the other ones are optional.
let's talk about open rates, because I think you
Open
mentioned
rates.
that one, and that one's very distinctive, especially from a sales perspective. It means nothing.
Exactly.
And why? Right? Like, I don't know, most people might know this in marketing, but the open rates on the emails are measured actually by the pictures, or
Right.
the so if somebody has a preview window open and they're scanning through their email, that's going to count as an open rate, but they never actually read it. They
Good.
may have actually just opened it to delete it
Yes, that is
because the
true.
preview window comes up on their email. That's
It's
the
like
distinction.
it's like measuring something like you're almost there, but not quite. Another example, that same thing, SEO company uh, optimizing to drive traffic, which they did pretty well, but then giving no thought to converting them once they got there. So their metrics were about getting people there, which is, by the way, that's what they got paid on. They didn't get paid to convert, right? Now the client would think, well, isn't that part of the deal? Not necessarily. And I guess that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I think more businesses need to understand this stuff so that the marketing industry, you know, doesn't take advantage. And I think that these vanity metrics, as we're just going to call them that, I think they're taking advantage. And I think some of it is because people don't want to get measured, right? You as a salesperson, you want everybody looking at your close rate all the time?
So here's a question for you.
Probably
Do you
not.
think the MQL has become a vanity metric?
Boy, that's a great question. It is in a way, because it's you're not there on the journey yet. It's just a start. You know what I mean? It's a good thing to know but I put it in the B class of metrics. Now, marketing agencies often measured on that.
Well, so are marketing departments, and there's
Yeah.
still a disconnect in many companies between the handoff of an MQL to to an actual SQL where sales is following up on it. Even as recent as 5 years ago, that was a valid metric.
Right.
I think it's falling apart now.
Well, and let's make sure MQL, marketing qualified lead, SQL, sales qualified lead. There is a third one now that people are splitting up into there, and I'm trying to remember what it is. It has something to do with proposal, I think. Yeah, the one that counts is, say, in that case, in that scenario, is sales qualified. That's one I would track. And then I would look at close rate, and then I would look at profitability on a deal by deal basis. Cost metrics, that's another whole basket of worms there. Cost of acquisition, that's a good one. That seems to be a lost metric. But clicks, followers, likes, when the focus becomes on the number, right? This is a classic kind of measurement conundrum, I think, for advertising and marketing is, was it that landing page and form that converted that person, that customer, that prospect, or did they see it on LinkedIn, and then they saw it in their inbox, and then they saw something about it in the trade press, and then they saw the email, and then they went, you know what I mean? What was it actually that put them over the edge? It's a very inaccurate game, but nobody wants to say so because it's a lot easier to, let's go with the easy to measure stuff that impresses people, and let's not really talk about the real things. Because I think a lot of marketing resources and agencies and people, I don't think they'd last very long if they started measuring some of the real things. So I think that's part of it, but I think part of it's human nature too.
With
It was
the
just
uh, with the sales cycle changing so much, I mean, there's just not a straight path in these complex deals, right?
no, not at
Uh,
all.
I think the Challenger customer I just read uh, says average of 5.4 people involved in a complex sale,
Yep,
and each one of their paths is different.
yep. And
So
so, how do you count it? You know, I knew
you
this
count
guy
it
was going
by,
to
are we
call during
making
the show.
sales? Yeah,
Uh,
it's like, so how do you
right.
measure like all these different buyer journeys when there's five different people involved in a deal? You're going to measure their click rates into your website. Like, it just doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right. Well, and if you try to measure every little thing along that journey, that just equals expense. So this is another thing that I always want to tell clients that maybe that people aren't telling them, but the more things you measure, the more expensive it's going to be because it takes a lot of effort and manpower to track things and to sift through those reports and to analyze, that information because it's just information until it's analyzed by somebody. So if you have a lot of it as an agency, especially, the more we track, the more time it takes. And so that's why I think we need to focus on the ones that really are directly bearing on your objective. So, we talk a lot about the objective, closing a deal. Companies can have objectives like educating their customers or a variety of different ends, but the metrics are still kind of the same. Somebody needs to take an action, something needs to happen that sells a product or a service.
Yeah, one thing I'm particularly excited about is all the work going on in behind the scenes with AI to try to go through your database, go through the universe, and try to figure out buyer intent based on
Hmm.
past performance of what's happened so it can predict in your database who might be giving buying signals. That's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, and that's the other side of this whole coin where, this incredibly complex mechanism is, is a hindrance as much as it is a boon. And now with Apple, changing their operating system, I mean, it's constantly changing. And so again, when you're so focused on metrics that you're missing the bigger picture, I think that's where the problem comes. Where somebody arbitrarily sets some number, or net promoter score is another good one. But in some cases, these have varying levels of value. I don't want to say that any particular metric is worthless, because they're all relevant on some level. But how many can you afford to track? How many can you make sense of? And how many directly bear on the objective of what you're trying to achieve? Maybe that's
Yeah.
the test for any time, like, hey, what should we measure? Put it through that test. If it matches those things, that's probably something you should measure.
I should mention too that sales has a lot of metrics that are starting to go by the wayside as well, especially when it pertains to BDRs and our business
Business
development
development
reps. Yes.
representatives.
Uh, but number of dials, number of emails, things like that. I would advise that BDRs out there use those metrics that their company has set up to the point where uh, they figure out their own path. But if you're just dialing, if you're just sending out emails, you're not doing research, you're not doing really what it takes to be getting engagement, being helpful when you reach out. Those metrics are gonna be difficult.
Well, right now you're talking the softer metrics, right? That we know objectively make a difference in the success of the sales cycle, but they're really hard to measure. Brand is actually one of those things. You actually can measure it, but it's very expensive. And then there's other things that are kind of so mushy that you can't really measure them in such a quantitative way, but they are still important, right? But I think if anything today, what I've taken out of this is it's the precursor metrics that, if you're focusing on the precursor activities and metrics, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah, I still like to measure sales conversations. So, in other words, how many qualified conversations am I actually getting into, whether they come from a marketing qualified lead, whether they come from, outbound research that I've done or engagement. Usually, if I can book, say, 10 appointments a month, I'm pretty, I'm going to get 3 or 4 good SQL opportunities to proceed forward with. Um, Assuming that you're uh, validating the companies that are coming through that meet your ideal client profile would be one of
Right.
the metrics by which to measure like an MQL.
So stay tuned for a lot more interesting topics. We're not going to just grind axes, although we're going to do plenty of that. We've got a lot of good topics coming up. For example, are you putting up roadblocks for your prospects? It's a great question. We're going to tackle it next time. Make sure you smash the subscribe button. We need you to do that. See you next time. I should be on the
Excellent.
news.